Hey, welcome back to another episode of Transform Your Workplace. This show is brought to you by Zennium HR. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and today we've got a great episode for you that you're not going to want to skip. Joining me on today's episode is Mitch Warner, the co-author of the newly released 4th edition of Leadership and Self-Deception, The Secret to Transforming Relationships and Unleashing Results. This book has been a game changer for leaders worldwide, and it's now more relevant than ever. In our discussion, Mitch and I talk about how self-deception can hinder our effectiveness as leaders and teammates, and we explore the power of seeing others as people, not as obstacles, and how this simple shift in mindset can transform relationships and unleash incredible results. Mitch also shares a profound personal story that highlights the impact of turning outward and truly connecting with those around us. A few key takeaways from my conversation with Mitch. We get into the real meaning of being stuck as a leader and how we can get out of that, why changing our mindset is more critical than changing behaviors, and how self-betrayal leads to self-deception and what we can do about it. We're going to get into the conversation, but before we jump in, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Zennium HR. Zennium provides custom HR solutions for small and mid-sized company, helping them transform their workplace in a positive way by building engaged cultures and thriving teams. Learn more about Zennium at zenniumhr.com. After the episode, if you found value in the conversation, make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And I'd love it if you shared it with anybody who might benefit from this. This is really how we're going to go out and transform workplaces in a positive way. If you do share it online, don't forget to tag me, Brandon Laws, and feel free to connect with me if you're not already. And make sure to tag Transform Your Workplace podcast on social media. We love hearing thoughts about how you're using the content from the show and also what topics are important to you. So I look forward to continuing the conversation. All right, let's dive into the conversation with Mitch Warner. Mitch, it is a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Brandon. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. We've been trying to do this for a while, so it's good that we've been able to connect. We're talking about the book. It's the 4th edition coming out August 27th. I think by the time this releases, the book it'll be out. It's called Leadership and Self-Deception, The Secret to Transforming Relationships and Unleashing Results. It's really interesting because it's written in a fable. So what we're going to talk about in this is a lot of the concepts that come from that book. And I'm really excited to dive in. It's a really interesting book. And it's got crazy ratings too. I think I was looking on Amazon. It's like 5,000 ratings and reviews and 5 stars. Congratulations on that.
It's been around almost 24 years now. And the interesting thing about this book is it sells more every year than the year before, which is just unheard of for books. So it's just, people pass it along. People find a lot of just personal value in the book.
When you create a new edition like that, do you add in extra pieces to the story? Do you add in the things at the back where it's like exercises that teams can use? Like how does it work?
I mean, as far as editions go, you never know quite what a new edition means. For this 4th edition of this book, we actually started from scratch. We started a blank sheet. And for people that have read it before, they'll notice that the basic storyline is the same and a number of the characters are the same, but we wanted to completely update it, make it more practical, make it more immediately applicable in today's working environment. So
that's great. Yeah, the working environment's changed a lot over the years. And you know what I hear from leaders, and myself, I'll say this too, is like sometimes I feel stuck and I don't really know what that means or what's really happening. Do you know, like when leaders say they're stuck, what's going on?
It can mean a lot of different things, for sure. And diving in and trying to figure out what exactly do you mean by being stuck is really helpful. But we just had a leadership call this morning inside of our own company where all the leaders came together, and we look regularly at our leadership through the lens of the tools that are presented in that book. And it's amazing that where people really feel stuck the most is around people problems. Other problems, there's usually some kind of tactical solution or some expert. Where we really get stuck is the people dynamics that are going on in an organization. And those are the things that keep people up at night. And leaders know that if they can't get a handle on the people problems, nothing gets any better, because people are the ones who fix stuff. And that's ultimately what we find, is that when a leader says, I feel stuck, it's usually, I don't know how to mobilize people, or I don't know how to resolve this conflict, or I don't know how to get people to collaborate that are so siloed. It's usually some form of one of those. And at its heart, I think the reason why people feel stuck around those people problems is because of this core issue of self-deception. The reality that the problems that people are engaged in, they seem to be the last ones to know their own contribution to those problems. So you got a whole organization of people that are blaming problems on everybody else, and no one can see how they're contributing. And even when you tell someone, this is the part that you're playing, we resist it. We don't want to hear it. We want that to be someone else's fault. It seems like it always boils down to something around that core issue. That's why we wrote the book, entitled it Leadership and Self-Deception, because that's the theme we find over and over and over again.
I pulled out a quote that one of the fictional characters said in the book, and the quote says, if you're going to be successful leaders, the first and most important step is learning how to see. What does that mean in the concept of this discussion?
Yeah, it's interesting. McKinsey did this really interesting study a few years ago. It was a longitudinal study over many organizations. And what they found was that organizations that identify and address mindset at the outset are 4 times more likely to succeed at whatever they're trying to change than organizations that just go to behavior change. But it's natural that we want to change behavior, because we see that's the problem. People aren't behaving in the right way. But what they found, and what we find in our work, is that if you can change the way people see, if you can change their mindset, that's where behaviors are coming from. You and I behave in the way we do, the things that occur to us to act, to solve a situation, that comes as a function of how we see, how I see you, how I see myself, how I see my challenges, my opportunities. And so it seems like the most effective leaders that we have found are not the leaders that come in and say, all right, everybody, here's what we're going to do. They're leaders that just help people see what their job is, and particularly the people around them, and become alive to those people. Leaders that do that, they unlock innovation that leaders that just try to come in and prescribe behaviors, they not only get stuck, but they get resistance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And what's interesting is, with leaders, especially like new leaders too, like, how do they see their role? Do they see it that way, where they're mobilizing people and helping them solve problems and grow? Or do they see it as something different?
I think it's a function of how they see themselves, even deeper than that level of a leader. If I'm a leader of people, then I either see the people that I'm leading as like me, equal to me, that count the way I count, that matter the way I matter. I either have an outward mindset like that, or I have an inward mindset, which means I don't really see people that matter the way I matter. And that will mean I either see myself as better than them, and then the people that I'm leading as somehow inferior. And by the way, that's reinforced by the fact that I'm your leader, right? There's a reason why I'm here leading you and you're not leading me. Or, as is often the case, I see myself as inferior and I see everybody else as superior. And that's equally as dangerous. That's just as inward. You don't count the way I count, but now my life as a leader is dictated by a fundamental fear that I'm going to be found out, that, the fact that I'm really not cut out to do this, or I'm not fully equipped. So I spend my time managing all of your perceptions. I see myself as worse than, but I need to see myself as competent. So whether I see myself as better than you, and, I hope you deserve the goodness of my leadership, or I see myself as inferior and now I'm really insecure, either one of those ways of showing up, I'm going to fail as a leader. So I think, leaders are going to show up, and their primary driver of success is the degree to which they can just see people as people and themselves as a person among people. We're all trying to figure this out. I'm not trying to posture I don't see you as a problem in my way. We're just people together. People respond to people like that. I respond to people like that.
Yeah, I always say, like, it's not business to business or business consumer or whatever that we say. It's human to human at the end of the day, and that's true inside of an organization too. And when we're dealing with people, that it's a human interaction, and it's interesting that we don't treat it as such, or many leaders don't treat that as such. Seems like there needs to be some self-awareness around how we're seeing other people. Do you help people get to that self-awareness around how they're actually viewing people?
Yeah. And ultimately, that's the whole process of culture transformation that we enable inside of an organization. It's really no more or less than helping people become really aware of the places where they're not seeing other people as people. If I can figure out where that is, ultimately that's the diagnosis that I need to know how to solve the problems that are plaguing me. The way that I begin to see where I'm not seeing others, it's not to focus on myself. It's not like a project to become highly self-aware. That's not the project. The project is to finally see you and go, oh, what's it like to be Brandon? Whether I report to Brandon or he reports to me, or you're a customer or you're a peer of mine, it's like, what's life like for you? And specifically, what's life like for you having to work with someone like me? And when I become curious and you become a real person to me that counts the way I count, now I am self-aware. It's not a project of becoming self-aware. It's just a project of getting curious. And people that are curious in an organization, they just are naturally self-aware. But sometimes I think a lot of the modern kind of self-help stuff that we engage in is problematic because it's all about me. And that never works.
Yeah. Well, I pulled a nugget out of the book. There's tons of really good examples. I was talking about teams. And in particular, this example was showing a little chart, and it said how sales sees product. And then on the other side, it's how product sees sales. And one side, it's like negative thinking completely. It's unhelpfulness, close to feedback, unresponsive. And then on the product side, where they see sales, impatient, unrealistic, greedy. That seems to then probably perpetuate the problem anymore. How do you get out of that spiral?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And look, that example, you could put any label, and if you're listening to this, the teams that are in what we call collusion. We don't call it conflict because it's not conflict the way we typically think of conflict, where you've got two people that are doing problematic things and they just need to stop. We call it a collusion because the teams or the people, whoever is in conflict, actually, when you understand self-deception, you discover that they actually need the other team to be as problematic as they've said they are. So they'll end up provoking each other in a conflict to be the problem. And even though they say, man, I wish this other group would stop, or I wish this other person in my life would just change. Actually, when we're in conflict and we're self-deceived, we don't want the other person to change. And why? Because we need to be justified in seeing that person as the problem. So as long as I can get you to be the problem, then I'm justified, because I'm actually not okay mistreating you, right? But if you are all of those things and I can prove it out because I provoke you to be those things, hey, we're good. So your question was, well, how do you get out of that? The first thing you have to do is recognize that this is a collusion, that I actually have wanted this to be the way it is. As perverse and as hard to see as that is, it's like we've entered into this agreement. All right, Brandon, I'll mistreat you so that you can blame your bad behavior on me, if you'll mistreat me so that I can blame my bad behavior on you. And we'll just agree to do that. If I can see that, if I can diagnose that, then it's usually not that I need some cure to that. It's that realization helps me go, oh my word. Now, that question before, what has this been like for you? I might not be wholly to blame for this, right? The very things that I've said that you're doing, you might actually be doing them. But to the degree that I'm not seeing you as a person and I'm provoking you to continue to do them, I got to go, oh, I have a part in that. And just diagnosing that, I think, is half the cure in our experience in organizations. And then once I don't know the word, it's like once I'm soft enough, right? Once I'm willing to get curious, then usually the other half of the cure is just going to you and saying, hey, this is the way I've been creating problems. And here's some things I think I could do about that. And then you can respond and go, actually, yeah, that would be so helpful. Or now you have the space to say, oh, it's actually a little different than that. But now we're in dialogue. Now we're talking. Now we're collaborating on a solution together.
How often are leaders or teams ignoring the truth that's out there versus like a false belief that they have? And you illustrated this in the book with, I think the character was talking about a story of, I think it was doctors and midwives where they would have a lot of deaths in pregnant women delivering, and it was all due to like hand washing. So they continued to ignore the truth once even the data was out there. How does this show up in the workplace all the time, where we might be ignoring a truth for something that we've just believed all along to be true?
Yeah. I don't know how it is for everybody, but I'll tell you what it looks like for me. I would say most of the time I'm ignoring. And it's funny, that's an interesting word. I think it's a powerful word because it implies that I know what I'm blinding myself to. I have to know the truth so well if I'm going to hide it from myself so well. And it seems like we all have that power to keep ourselves from seeing what we know to be true. We wouldn't be so good at keeping ourselves from seeing that if we didn't know it was true to begin with. So I love that word, Brandon. We ignore it. And why do we do it? Because I think, at least for me, the need to be justified is more important in my life when I'm inward than success or happiness or any of the things that I say I'm invested in. I say I want this team to succeed, or I want this company to succeed, or I want my marriage to succeed, or I want my kids to succeed, or any one of those things, or I want to just be happy. But I end up sabotaging the very things that I say that I want because I actually want something more when I'm inward. I want to be justified. So I'll ignore any evidence that tells me that I'm wrong. And I'll bias myself toward evidence that, man, this story I've been telling about them is the truth. Now, my marriage doesn't get any better. My team doesn't get any better. My company doesn't succeed. But you know what? At least I'm justified. So,
yeah, it is interesting that the confirmation bias will come into play. We'll actually go seek the information, data, stories that reinforce the false belief that we have. That's dangerous, isn't it?
It's so dangerous. And when it comes to, shaping a culture, because I think the people that are listening to your podcast, they have a responsibility in one way or another to shape culture. You can do that in one of two ways. You can come in and you can implement programs, or you can prescribe behaviors, or you can incentivize behaviors, and maybe you do that through programs or something like that. Or you just help people free themselves from these justifications so that they can just be together again. And in my experience, that's what transforms a culture. It's just people free of the need to be justified for how they've been.
Yeah. You talk about self-betrayal. What does that mean in the context of this conversation, and maybe even map out a situation that might illustrate this in the context of self-deception?
Yeah, great question. Self-betrayal is so often the way that we find ourselves into self-deception. I don't wake up, one morning and with a lie that I'm invested in maintaining. Like, think about it like this. Let's say you and I work together, Brandon, and I come across a piece of information one day. Well, if I'm outward, if you count the way I count, if you matter the way I matter, if you're a person to me, then what would occur to me to do? Well, just go share this information because I know it'd be helpful for you. And then life goes on its way and we keep working and we achieve results. But let's say that I don't. Let's say that I betray my own sense, and it's no one else's sense. It's not something written on a wall. It's not some value. It's just, I have a sense about what the people around me as people deserve from me. And if I betray my own sense, that's why we call it self-betrayal. I'm not okay with that because you are a person. So I've got to create in this moment of self-betrayal a world where that refusal to honor your personhood is not only okay, but is the only rational thing that could happen. So I start to see you in certain ways. I might see you as problematic or lazy, because after all, if you'd been doing your job, you would have found this information anyway. And I might see you as competition because, only one of us can get the promotion at the end of the day. Or I might see you as as trying to sabotage me or any number of things. And how do I see myself? Exactly the opposite. Well, I'm so hardworking because I found this, and I'm smart. And in fact, I'm so smart that I know when to share and when not to share. Or I might even view myself as like magnanimous. I'm noble because what happens when you spoon feed people like you, Brandon? You just go soft. And the very fact that you didn't find this means that you really don't know how to do your job. And the last thing that would be actually helpful and kind is to give you too much. I need to help you grow, and you got to learn to grow up. Now, look what just happened. We talk about it as if it's like something that evolves. It just happens like that. The moment I betray myself, I'm not okay with it. And now I see you and I see myself and everybody else in a way that justifies that. And of course, now it's not that I shouldn't go back and do that thing. It wouldn't even be rational to do that thing. Now, it's interesting, that way of finding justification in the moment of self-betrayal with you, that's that better than way of seeing others that we were talking about that cripples leaders. But I could have gone the other way. In self-betrayal, I could have gone, oh man, Brandon, he always finds information first. He's so connected around here. Someone's probably already given this to him. I mean, he's so smart. He knows what he's doing, and I don't. And, the very fact that I found this now, if I go share this with Brandon, I'm sure he's found this a year ago. And so he's going to laugh at me, or he's going to I'll be found out. I can't cut it around here. And now I'm depressed and I'm anxious and I'm portraying myself in a way. So either way, however I find justification, whether I find it by seeing myself as better than or worse than others, the truth is you and I no longer see you as a person, right? You're oblivious to what's happening, but you'll start to pick up on that, right? And I'll start to invite you to be the very things that I've said that you are, right? Disconnected and above me, or problematic and lazy. I'll start to see if I can invite you into that space, because now there's even more evidence that I'm justified in not sharing that information.
Now that's like one example, but what happens when you stack those situations on top of each other? Now you got chronic self-betrayal and then self-deception happening. How does that end up tarnishing relationships in a negative way?
Well, let's take the example of, the first version of me in self-betrayal with you, that I see myself as superior and smart and so capable. If the company lost me, that'd be a big deal. They lose you, oh well. I'm not going to put that image of myself down. I'm going to carry that around. And so I'm going to carry that image of myself as smart and capable and hardworking and into new situations with new people. I'm going to walk into a meeting, you're not even there, and it's a whole other team. And if you ask me walking into this meeting, hey, Mitch, are you the kind of person that really likes great ideas? It doesn't matter where they come from. They don't have to come from you. You're invested in just doing the right thing, the most helpful thing. I'm like, yeah, that's me, right? But I walk into a meeting with this image that I've adopted of myself that's not true. It's a lie, but it gives me justification that I'm smart and capable and have all the answers. And then somebody else has a better idea, or I offer an idea and somebody says, oh, you know what, Mitch, I've tried that at another company. It didn't work. What about this? All of a sudden now, the feelings that I had in self-betrayal with you, how bugged I was and how much I was kind of in anguish around how problematic our relationship is, I feel all those same feelings in this meeting, and I shut down. Not because I betrayed myself, but because the image that I created in self-betrayal is now under threat, right? The very fact that someone else had a great idea is now a threat to my self-image, and there goes leadership. There goes collaboration. There goes productivity. And that's going on in every organization for everyone every day. I think it's the root cause at the heart of our dysfunction.
There's a passage that I pulled out that illustrated the humanity that we can have in other people. And I resonated with it so much because I've found myself thinking this way. I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, but this is the core of it. Quote says, when I was driving home yesterday, I started thinking about how each car around me had a person inside of it, or even whole families. And they were all going somewhere, which means they'd been somewhere, and they all have lives and feelings and loved ones waiting for them to arrive, end quote. And I love this so much because it gets us to think like, okay, wow, that's another person. They have a whole life. They have all these things maybe going on at home. They've got families. They are human, just like I am. How do we develop this mindset or make sure it's at the forefront so we treat others that we interact with at work, at home, our marriages, whatever it may be? How do we keep that in front?
Oh, that's a huge question. I've had that experience too, where all of a sudden, and it's almost like you can't hold on to it very, very long.
Yeah. Well, because then we get back to our own little world or bubble.
Yeah. And I got things to do and, they're really pressing, but every once in a while you do have those moments where you're like, wait a minute, everyone on this planet is a person that has an inner life that is as real as my own. I almost can't hold on to that thought for very long, but yeah, how do I stay there more often? I don't know what the answer is for everybody, but for me, at work, the reminder every day that my job is about other people. And it's not just because I'm a leader. It's that there's actually nothing I'm going to do today. Nothing. There's no task. There's no objective. There's nothing on my to-do list that doesn't impact another person's ability to succeed. So I can either do this in a vacuum, this task or activity, or try to accomplish this objective on my own, or because it impacts somebody else, what if I just went out and found out how this impacts them? How would that change what I do? And I'll tell you, for me, not only do I do better work when I remind myself of that every day, it's more satisfying. Like, it's enlivening. And I don't care what your job is. I don't care if you're making screwdrivers, recognizing, the way I do this impacts this person who's the recipient of that, or the person next to me who has to work next to me. Everything that I do impacts somebody else. It changes how I work. And I'll tell you, the best ideas I've ever had, like the most innovation, that's happened when I've realized, like, wait a minute, this is for so-and-so. I wonder what they're going to do with this. And I think that's true of companies too. I think the best, most innovative companies, that's how they think. They realize, like, we don't do this because this is what we do. We do this to help somebody. And what does that mean for them? So I think for me, that's been really helpful, is just when I go to work, remember everything that I do today impacts somebody. And then on the flip side of that, when I'm driving home, remember that every interaction that I have is going to impact somebody, and in really profound ways. And I remember, we all have those experiences where the way someone was with us had impact far beyond what they ever knew.
It is wild that even the smallest, tiniest positive interactions can have a major ripple effect. And I wish we were a little bit more cognizant of those interactions that we have with other people, to treat them more human, to be kind, because you never know what people are going through.
Yeah. I heard once that if you just assume that the people that you encounter are in serious trouble, you'd be right 3 times out of 4.
There's another statement that was pretty impactful. I don't want you to unpack it for me. It says, how a leader sees others is more important than anything they do or say. Unpack that for me. What does that mean to you?
What that means to me is that none of us are that good of an actor. We think we are. We think we can hide our mindset by being really polished in our behaviors up here. And it's just not true. And the reality is, when I think about the leaders that have impacted me, you'll have to think about the people in your life who have impacted you. But what I'm responding to in that person is not how they behave toward me. What I'm responding to is how they see me. And I know that because I've had leaders who are kind of bumbling, to be honest, in their behavior. We've all had the experience where we get really hard feedback, for example, and it comes from a person that just doesn't like us. And it might be the most polished delivery that you could imagine. From an HR lens, you read a transcript of that conversation, you're like, wow, I can't critique that. That was picture perfect. And it doesn't matter to the person who's the recipient. All that matters is, did this person see me as a person? Were they trying to manipulate me? Did they think they were better than me? And then you have this other one and you're like, oh my word, this looks like a train wreck. I can't believe that, like, let's work on your communication skills. And yet the person that's the recipient is so motivated because what came through was that they care. And you can't hide that. You can't mask whether or not you care. And whether you care about someone or not is a function of how you see them. Are they real to you? Are they a person? Does their success matter to you as much as your own? That will come through no matter what you do at the level of behavior. And I think the challenge is too often as leaders, and I'll speak for myself, I think the trick is behavior. I gotta do something better. So I'll read leadership books and I'll mimic leaders that do really good things, and it doesn't work because how I see as a leader is the most important driving force when it comes to my influence on other people. At least being the recipient of leadership, that's what my experience is.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. So the book, it follows this story, fictional story, a lot of intricacies that talk about a lot of these concepts, and at the very end, it says the cure for self-deception is simple to say and hard to live, and it's to turn outward. What does that mean? Why is this hard to live by? And give us some tips for how we can turn outward.
Well, would you mind if I just told a little story from my own life?
Yes, please.
So, yeah, easy to say, hard to do. And I think the reason why turning outward is hard to do is because we live in a work environment where we've been acculturated to think about a job in a certain way. It is about what I do. It's my tasks and objectives. So I'll go into a client, for example, and I hear this version of this statement in almost every organization I work with. Oh, well, so-and-so is really good at their job, but they make life really hard for people around here. And you're like, you said what? So and the thing is, everybody's heard that. Like, that's the world we live in, that you can be good at your job and at the same time, in the way you do your job, make it harder for people to do their job.
Yeah, it means you're not good at your job then.
Right. So it's easy to say turn outward, but until as leaders, we help people rethink what it means to have a job, it's too hard because people go back to, well, this is what I'm trying to do, head down, not maliciously, but I just don't see people who are impacted. When I was 18, I had my real first kind of job. It was in a nursing home in Redlands, California. And I was working in the business office, and this nursing home had been recently acquired by a new management company. And I'm just like fresh out of high school. I don't know what I'm doing, but they were charitable enough to give me this job in the business office, trying to collect on bills and things. Well, the administrator said, "Hey, Mitch, the patients in this facility have been so long neglected by prior management companies that in addition to what you're doing in the business office, which is really important, I want you to also make time to interact with every patient in this facility every day." And there were 78 beds in this facility. So I was like, okay, well, if that's my job, then I'll go do my job. And I did it. I made time to interact with everyone in that facility. And I'll tell you what, Brandon, I hated it because I really didn't like old people. So, but I did what I thought was my job. And I remember my very first day doing this, my job, I went into this room. It was just a single patient in this room. And I could see this woman in this hospital bed. When I walked in, I could see the placard on the door. Her name was Linda. And I walk in and there's this woman and she's laying back in a hospital bed and the sheets are pulled up really tightly over her, so tight that I can see the shape of her feet underneath the sheets and they're severely contracted. And then her hands are on top of the sheets and they're severely contracted like this. And I just introduced myself. I said, "Hey, Linda, my name's Mitch. I'm brand new here. First day. How are you?" And she doesn't say anything. She just looks at me and she looks kind of bugged. So I think, well, maybe she can't hear me. So I get close to the bed and I said, "Hi, Linda. First day. Is there anything that I can do for you?" And she doesn't say anything. She just looks at me. And I don't know if, Brandon, you've ever had like a fully one-sided conversation, but it can't last for more than a couple minutes. So I finally said, "Well, nice to meet you. And I'll be back tomorrow." And I turned and left and I came back tomorrow. And I came back the next day and the next day. And I did my job for weeks. I had the same one-sided conversation for weeks. Going into Linda's room, every time she looked annoyed, never once did she say a single word to me. And I remember one day after weeks of doing my job, I turned to leave, say goodbye, and then I see behind the door that leads out to the hallway, her patient closet is open. And there's something that's fallen out of it. It's on the floor, and it's this rolled up kind of poster board looking thing, but it's really gross and it's kind of torn up and it's dusty. And so I go pick it up and I take it out in the hall, and I'm walking down the hall to take this to the dumpster. And this nurse stops me and says, "Hey, Mitch, where are you going with that?" I said, "Oh, it's just a piece of trash I found in Linda's room. I'm just taking it out to the dumpster." And she said, "Oh, do you know what that is?" And I said, "No, I hadn't looked at it." And I open it up, and it's this 11 by kind of 17 piece of poster board. And it's got all of these black and white images on it, like a tray of food and a pencil and the toilet and a glass of water, things like that. And the nurse says, "That's a communication board. Linda, she can't speak." And I didn't know that. And the thing about that story for me, the question that you posed that comes out of that statement at the end of the book, turning outward is really easy to say. It's pretty hard to do. You have to ask yourself, how many people are going around in our organization thinking they're doing their job because they're doing everything that's assigned to them? The people that aren't doing what's assigned to them, those should be easy. They need to go find another organization. But the ones that we have that are hardworking and they're well-intentioned and they are doing everything that they've been asked, how many of them are actually not doing their job? They're not turning outward because the very way that we have helped them understand what it means to have a job doesn't take into account the fact that everything that you do impacts somebody else. Everything that you do. And when you discover that, it changes everything. I don't know how long this woman had been lying in this hospital bed with the communication board sitting inside of her patient closet, but that just doesn't make any sense. And I remember as soon as I realized that this person that I was assigned to go and interact with, thinking I was doing my job, was an actual person with needs and hopes and challenges, that she mattered the way I mattered, then I had to go find out what her story was. Who is this person that I've been talking at? No wonder she seems annoyed. And when I learned what her story was, it changed the way I felt. And so I remember with this nurse, we went to the supply closet and we found this box. It was about the size of a shoebox that some supplies had come in, and we taped it all up and we wrapped it in construction paper, and we put a dowel through the middle of it so that Linda could hold this on her chest. We could affix it inside of her contracted hands. Then we printed out all of those different pictures and some other ones that hadn't been included. And then on one side, we printed out a keyboard, on paper. So all the letters of the alphabet were there. And then we got some dental wax and we affixed this pencil in her mouth so she could hold this on her chest and point to the letters of the alphabet. And for the first time, she could speak. And I think that experience for me, it's not that unique. Everyone has a job that impacts people. And you're never going to turn an organization outward if you think about, well, what's the behavior people should be doing? Because I was doing all the behaviors I was told. What no one could tell me to do was the behavior that could only be an outgrowth of seeing her differently. And if you can help people realize that your job is not to do stuff, your job is to see the people that are impacted by you, and then your job is to figure out how to do your work in a way that helps them accomplish their objectives. That, just like an inward mindset, that downward spiral we were talking about before is contagious. That outward mindset is also contagious. It catches fire in an organization.
Wow. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that story. I imagine it, being as young as you were, having that moment, it probably changed the trajectory of your career and in the work that you do. So I really, really appreciate that. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. The book is called Leadership and Self-Deception, The Secret to Transforming Relationships and Unleashing Results. It's the 4th edition, out end of August. Mitch, where can people connect with you if you're willing to connect with people or learn more about your work, what the Arbinger Institute's doing, anything like that?
Absolutely. Well, read the book. There's a lot of resources in that book. So once you read, there's discussion guides, there's ways to connect, ways to see how to incorporate that in your leadership. Come to arbinger.com, see the solutions that are available. I'd love to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. Let's start a conversation and help you on this journey, help you turn your organization out.
My guest today has been Mitch Warner. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Brandon.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.